Welcome to the ProcureTech podcast, bringing insight and inspiration into how digital technology is shaping our profession. I'm your host, James Meads, tea drinker, expat, definitely not your typical consultant. Welcome to another edition of the ProcureTech podcast, where every week we bring you stories, insights, and thought leadership from everyone who are the movers and shakers within the procurement technology space. And this week is no different. And for those of you who are maybe listening and are just starting to embark on your digital procurement journey, or maybe don't really understand all of the different options and choices that are out there, today's episode is going to be a wealth of information for you. We're going to dig into the subject of why a traditional ERP system such as SAP or Oracle is not really helpful in terms of what you want to get out of it as a procurement professional. And then we'll dig into some of the reasons why, and also then look at some of the different technological solutions out there and what are the pros and cons of those different approaches, depending on the size of your business and the maturity of your organization. And to do this, I've brought someone onto the show who is a wealth of experience in the source to pay and procure to pay field to dive into this topic. So, Joël Collin-Demers, welcome to the ProcureTech podcast.
Thanks so much for having me.
Awesome. So, Joël, just tell us really quickly what brought you into this space and your background, and we'll dive in from there.
Yeah, sure. So I've been in the procurement tech space or procurement implementation space for just under 10 years now, right? So I started off fresh out of school at IBM in corporate consulting and did a lot of SAP implementations for the materials management modules, which traditionally serves procurement and inventory management functions within the business. And recently, so progressed there and did a number of initiatives. I think last time I counted had worked with 10 clients in 8 different industries for 12 different transformation projects around procurement. So I'm starting to have gone around the block and seen the different things that you can do. Because as you know, I'm sure you've heard the quote before that an expert is someone who's done seen all of the mistakes that you can possibly do in a narrow field. So I'm beginning to have gone around the block, and in the last year and a half, I've started my own consultancy practice for this exact thing, right? So for developing roadmaps with organizations that want to develop their maturity in the procurement space and how that translates into technology and putting that all together so that you get to your end game.
Fantastic. So let's dive in then with the really meaty question first of all, because normally I wouldn't do this, but I think in this case it's really good to examine this first and then sort of dive into some of the detail behind that. So why are enterprise level ERP systems such as SAP and Oracle being the most common ones, I guess, not necessarily the right solution for procurement teams to get the data from them that they want to get?
And I think that's a very important question, right? I think it's an essential system to have, especially when you get to a certain size in your corporation, because it's essential for integration with the other functions, right? So finance, HR, your inventory management functions as well, right? So I don't think it's something that you can get rid of or do without once you get to a certain size as an organization. However, they're mostly lacking critical functions that procurement needs to be able to deliver value for the business, right? So most traditional ERP systems do not have, for example, big spend management modules integrated into the solution, or they don't have sourcing capabilities that are needed to be able to go out to market for different RFX events, right? Whether it be RFQ, request for quotations, request for informations, or request for proposals. And then the last piece is also contract management, where signing a legal contract and the workflow that needs to happen there and the signatures is not necessarily supported within these ERP systems. And actually, I'll add one last one, which is vendor management, right? So being able to manage a vendor's life cycle through your business, and when they onboard and the certifications that they need to have, and then how that data flows through different systems, and then what happens at the end of the relationship to make sure that your organization is not able to use that vendor again, right? So all of those functionalities I just mentioned aren't typically or in the big ERPs, right? So as I know SAP and Oracle are working on their newer versions, but those big systems are usually slower to evolve than the applications that are catering specifically to procurement in the source to pay space.
You've covered a lot of the technical reasons why they're not necessarily suitable for getting data out that procurement teams want to use, but a big one for me as well, I mean, I've never used Oracle, but I've used SAP extensively, is just user experience and how complicated it is. I mean, I get the feeling with SAP that you need to be a super user to be able to use it properly.
Oh, for sure. And I mean, that's a big sticking point as well that you see for folks using traditional ERP systems, right? That's why they're turning to source to pay technology to be able to have web interfaces and have fields that are specific to their businesses without having to pay an arm and a leg to change the back end system, right? So I think that does play a role, but at the end of the day, for me, it's all about supporting process in the most integrated way possible from end to end, right? So the technology plays a piece, but then you have to think about how am I going to get my spend insights at the beginning of the process through a sourcing event, through a contract, into potentially a catalog or a contract item in a system, whether it be your back-end ERP or a source-to-pay buying system, and then all the way to payables, right, which we haven't touched on yet, but that all needs to be looked at holistically to be able to function.
So we've established then that using an enterprise level ERP system probably won't get what we need as procurement professionals, but that there's a whole array of different tools out there on the market that are catering to this nowadays, and the whole procuretech industry, especially in the last sort of 4 or 5 years, has exploded. And I think before we dig into all of the different solutions out there, maybe if you could explain the difference between what is often called P2P and S2C. I'm a person that generally hates acronyms, so I think that would be a good place to start, just in case someone that's listening to this doesn't know. And then we can dive into some of the different solutions out there and the nuances and differences and pros and cons of those.
So from a process perspective, let's start with S2C, which is source to contract, right? So that's usually at the start of your procurement process, where you're deciding how to go out to market to source a specific requirement, and then once you get your vendor bids back, you decide who wins the bid. You bring them into contract negotiations, establish a formal contract, sign it, and then you have something to go on for when you actually need to buy those different goods, right? And that can be in a CapEx, capital expenditure setting, or in an OpEx setting, operational expenditure setting, right? So that's the source to contract piece. And then that feeds into what's usually referred to as P2P or procure to pay, right? So procure to pay is, I have a specific requirement, I put a purchase requisition out to be able to get approval on the purchase that I want to do as someone in the corporation. That gets approved. We cut a purchase order and send it to the vendor. They fulfill that requirement. We get a goods receipt or a services receipt, right, in the system or in the company to say, yes, we've actually received the good. It's good quality. It meets our requirements. It meets the contract or the purchase order, depending on if you have a contract or not. And then you get eventually that invoice at the end of the process, where you have to find, okay, well, are there extra fees? Does this match up with what we ordered? And then send that off for payment, right? So that piece is procure to pay, and that's usually what people will refer to as purchasing. Whereas if you're looking for procurement or for the whole value that can be derived from a procurement function, then you're including source to contract up front, and the whole thing I would refer to it as source to pay. So you'll often hear that as well.
So in simple terms then, P2P generally would cover the more transactional side of what procurement or purchasing would do, and source to contract is the complete end to end. So if we're talking about ProcureTech or software solutions to solve this, then a source to contract solution would have a sourcing module at the beginning to do things like RFIs, RFPs, RFQs, scouting, and also then some kind of contract management or contract sign-off module at the end.
Yeah, that's right. And just to tie it back to what we were saying earlier, a system like SAP or Oracle will usually do that transactional piece very well, but will not do the sourcing and contract management piece very well. And that's where all these providers that you're mentioning, I think the last time I saw like a compilation, there was over 60 vendors in this space worldwide, right? So it's getting pretty crowded.
I think there's more than that now.
They were,
yeah. I stumble across them every day when I look on Twitter. When I follow someone on Twitter, then something else pops up, and I didn't know who they were.
I'll say 60 like recognized ones that have a full functionality, or have a good footprint in the market. I'll put it that way, because you're right. It seems like there's a new ProcureTech company popping up every day. So SAP will do that transactional piece very well, and then the gaps that are left, that's where you see all these solution providers popping up.
So there are a lot of solution providers out there, some of them new, some of them not so new. And if I go to some of the more established ones in the market, which are typically the bigger, sort of more enterprise level solutions that larger companies would use. I'm thinking, the Coopers, the Zycuses, the iValuers of the world. I mean, I know there are more as well, but I think they're the big three. How are they different then from a company just using SAP or Oracle to do their procurement?
So usually those types of systems will come into play in two different situations, right? Either you're a small to medium business and you're getting to a point where you need something more structured to manage your procurement activities. So you'll look to one of those, and you don't necessarily have a back-end ERP system, right? So you'll look to one of those to support the majority of your procurement activities or operations, right? And you're able to, at the end of the process, just get a payment file out and then send that into an accounting system, and that's all she wrote, right? That's all you need in terms of integration with the rest of your company and the rest of your systems. And then there's the other aspect is usually with larger corporations. They will have an SAP or an Oracle or a JD Edwards ERP system in the back end, and it's doing a lot of procurement transactions already, and it's got a lot of linkage with inventory management and potentially quality management and all these other business functions. And then iValuer, Zycus, Coupa, Ariba, or even Baseware, right, would come in and integrate with that ERP system. And that's where it gets a lot more complex, because you have to decide, what functions or what processes and activities am I going to put in one of these source to pay solutions, and what am I going to keep in the back end ERP system, and why, right? And that's where the complexity comes about, and that's where you want to have folks on your side that have done it before, because there's a lot of potential pitfalls.
So because those solutions are typically more complex and would require integration with an ERP system, whereas some of the more standalone software solutions or what we call best of breed that concentrate on just one specific aspect of the source to contract cycle may sit in the cloud and be able to sort of work organically without any ERP integration. Does that then have a bearing on what solutions generally tend to be viable for different sizes of business? So, I mean, for example, if you've got a business with, say, 3 production sites and 400 employees, it's going to be a lot tougher just from a cost and expense perspective to be able to submit to a CFO a calculation that justifies the investment in terms of payback within 1 or 2 years, as opposed to if you're 40 billion corporate conglomerate with offices or operations in 10, 15 different countries and thousands of employees.
Oh, for sure. And I think you can break that up into different blocks as well over time, right? Like it's much easier. The complexity comes as when you have integration, right? That's clear for me. So if you don't want to manage that complexity up front, and you don't even have a mature process yet, then you could turn to these technologies to do your sourcing processes, for example, and structure them in a meaningful and value generating way. in the cloud, right, or in one of these solutions we mentioned earlier, without integrating to any other system, right? And what that will do is it will force you to have manual integration activities, either at the front, during, or at the end of your process to feed information into other systems. But what it will do is give you the tools to get to a more mature state in your process. And once you've gotten there, then you can start looking at integration with other systems, right? Because I've seen a lot of businesses try to do both at the same time, where they don't have mature sourcing or contract management processes, and instead of doing this first step and then integrating later on when they understand how to integrate manually, right, the information flow between different systems, they jump into integration from the start, and they kind of let the tool dictate how their process should run, or they try to fit what they think their process will be into the integration, and then you get a whole mix of different scenarios that can happen, but most of them are bad, right? Because you're trying to fit a square peg into a round hole, but at the same time you haven't decided what size the hole is going to be yet. Anyways, I'm diving deeply into analogies here, but it's just a bad idea to do everything at the same time, is what I'm trying to say.
So kind of reading a little bit between the lines then, Joel, would you say that for a company that doesn't have a mature sourcing or procurement function, it's probably a better approach to take a sort of best of breed approach for a couple of different points along the source to contract cycle, to get those under control and get a feeling of, sort of bringing technology into the business and using that to drive process before going down a complete enterprise level solution for a procurement software solution provider.
Right, and I think that's a roadmap question, right? It's if you're able to sort of plan your guiding principles and your high level objectives and milestones in time, right? Whether it be on a 5, 10, or 15-year journey where you're saying, okay, well, here's where we are today. Let's be honest about that, and let's do the exercise to clearly know what our maturity level is in all these different aspects of the procurement process. And then from there, establish what your objectives are, right? Like you might be in an industry where the name of the game is sourcing, right? And you're able to do a lot of damage or get a lot of savings and cost benefits with sourcing activities, right? Because of the nature of your industry and your market. So you're going to want to become very mature in that space, right? And so when you get to your desired end state, you're going to want to have that integration from sourcing into your transactional processes, right? Whereas with contract management, it might not be the case, right? So then you could opt for something that's more best of breed in that space, because there's not going to be a lot of integration with other systems, right? So I think you need to ask yourself those questions up front, because if you have the approach that you're mentioning where you say, okay, well, I'm going to go best of breed here now because we don't know necessarily where we're heading down the road, well, then you start to invest into this system, and it makes the switching cost a lot more important later on, right? Whereas if from the start you've thought about your roadmap, you've thought about where you want to end up from a desired state perspective, right, at the end game, even though it might take 10, 15 years to get there, realistically speaking, then you're going to make choices that you don't have to go back on over time, right? So I hate to give you the classic consulting answer, it depends, but it's really, that's what it is, right? It's you need to understand your context and your reality from multiple perspectives, whether it be IT architecture-wise, whether it be business-wise and the market and industry that you live in. How hard is it to get talent within your business as well, right? So can you get people that are technologically savvy and procurement savvy to operate in your business or where you are, and that'll all have impacts on how you want to approach this.
And you made a couple of really good points there, because people, we've not really touched on people, but it's such a big factor, isn't it? I mean, it's along with data, which I've spoken about at length with some of my previous guests on the show. If you put garbage in, you get garbage out. But if your people are not well trained or are not well versed in this whole setup, you're also going to get limited use out of an expensive solution. It's a bit like putting a Ferrari engine into a Hyundai. It's
for sure.
If you've got an expensive tool but you've not got the staff to operate it, then yeah, it's kind of useless. I mean, do you find in going into procurement teams that you're supporting to implement these solutions, do they generally have data scientists that are sat within procurement, or do they tend to borrow them from other departments?
Yeah, usually not in procurement, right? I haven't seen that. I've seen that maybe once, I think, over the last 10 years. Usually, most organizations will be in the state that you mentioned, where there's always less staff for the amount of things that you want to be able to do, and these types of projects are there to bring efficiencies, whether on the cost side so that we can justify more FTEs, or on the process efficiency side so that we can take FTEs out of transactional processes and put them into more strategic activities, right? So, and then in doing that, it goes back to what we were mentioning earlier, like you have to have a transition plan for those folks, right? How do they grow capabilities to be able to switch from an operational role to a tactical or even strategic role? And I would add, there's a bunch of other things that before going out to market and selecting one of these solutions, you'd want to think about. So establishing a strong, lasting partnership with IT, because this is a technology, right? You're bringing it into your business. You want it to speak with other systems, or otherwise you're going to put yourself in a position where you're going to have a bunch of Excel files flying around, right? Which is what you're trying to get away from.
Exactly.
You want to understand and optimize your current processes, right? Which I kind of touched on a little bit earlier, but also in the planning exercise of your roadmap, what is going to be your to-be process, right? So if you're bringing one of these sourcing or contract management solutions into play, how are you going to use it, right? And what's the process going to look like from a business perspective with that application in the picture? And then you're able to jointly with IT create a target state architecture for your systems, but also for your business processes, right? And that's the key to me, because if you just approach it from a technology perspective, then you're going to run into trouble where the application is not going to meet your needs for specific things, right? And I think that it kind of touches to a question you had earlier, which is like how you would approach selecting one of these, right? And if you know your requirements and what your company needs, then that's what you're going to be looking out for.
So let's imagine I'm a category manager, or I'm a procurement process lead, or procurement center of excellence lead, and I've been tasked with sourcing a procuretech solution to improve procurement performance, data quality, visibility of spend data, understanding what contracts we've got and where. So a source to contract solution. Other than what you already touched on about establishing strong relationships with IT to understand what the end game should be and what's already out there, how would you go about that process of, we're here at the moment that the budget's been signed off, IT have committed that they have the resources to help with a project. Where do you go from that point through to selecting a vendor?
So on top of what I mentioned, as you said, I think there's team selection, right? So even before you start thinking about technology and selecting that, is who are your subject matter experts within the business for procurement that know as well who your major stakeholders are and what their requirements usually are from a sourcing perspective or for contract management. And bring them on, right? Bring them on the team for selection of the tool, and make sure they're your A players and not your C, your D, your E players, right? Because often that'll be the case, right? Unfortunately, it'll be like, oh, okay, we're selecting a new technology, a new tool, like who has extra capacity, right? And then you just send them off.
Yeah, no, I'm laughing because it's so true. I mean, it always used to be a running joke in previous companies that I worked for that if someone had the title special projects, it was usually the last thing that they did before they got fired.
Well, and hopefully we can change that, and that's not always the case, right? But that's a big difference I've seen, right? Organizations that treat this as not a tool selection, but a re-engineering of their processes and a leveling up of their maturity, and send their best folks in to to take a look at the process and at the tools and participate in the selection will have the best results, right? The other piece is data quality. I think you've touched on this in previous episodes on your show, but starting to look at, okay, well, what is our spend in these different categories? Which ones are the most important, and which ones, from a requirements perspective, once we have the right people getting those requirements, which ones should have the most weight, right? Because they have the most impact on our business. And then from there, you would go into a traditional sourcing process, right? But even before you go out to RFI, you might be able to save yourself a lot of effort and steps just by going out and getting databases of information that are already out there on the numerous, like these 60 vendors I was mentioning, right? So a good example of that is Spend Matters. I don't know if you must be knowledgeable in that site.
I know them. Yeah.
So they have this guide called the Solution Map, right? And they basically do an RFI with these top 60 vendors in the space every quarter on a number of requirements, and they ask them to come back and do solution demos and rate them, right? So they're basically doing RFIs on these solutions all the time. So you're able to kind of jumpstart your process by leveraging one of those accelerators, one of those, Gartner does similar things, Forrester as well. So look out to those research firms. So that's one piece. Which might help you to bypass the RFI process completely, or at the very least lighten it a lot. Then the second piece is making sure that you're going and seeing other folks that have the solutions you're looking at, and looking at how they're using them in their operations, right? You'll be surprised at how willing folks are to let you into their different offices, their different plants, to show you how they're using the solution, and it allows you to create kind of a super user group later on as well, right? As you're implementing, and then as you're operating with a solution, you're able to ask questions to your peers, whether they be from in the same industry or in the same market. People will usually be fairly open to sharing what they've learned and how they're using the solution, because they know that you'll come back to them later on, and they'll be able to draw on you to say, hey, how are you guys approaching X, Y, and Z problem with this tool? And you do knowledge sharing in that way, right? So doing those two big things at the start will set you up for success later on in the process when you're looking at the RFP responses from the vendors you've chosen, right? Because when vendors respond to 250 or 300 different requirements that you've put together, it's very hard to, like, there's often nuance in the responses, and most vendors will try to find a nuance to be able to respond yes to your question to get those points. So you're not necessarily always getting the correct, what you're looking for as information, right? So get your hands dirty, get in the solutions as quickly as possible, and before you make your choice, if possible, as well.
That's gold. So if next time you're at a conference, if you see Joël, you owe him a beer, because he's probably taken about 4 weeks out of your project cycle just by following his advice there. And joking aside, I think
it's no joke.
going into a peer company and just looking at what they're using it for and how they're using it. If they're not a competitor, this is such an underutilized method of being able to get clarity quickly, but very few companies use it. It's a really important point, and one that's often very underutilized.
And I'll give you another example to illustrate why this is important, right? And it's when you're hiring someone individually, like if you're hiring an individual and you don't do a reference check, right? It's something that's so easy to do, and for me, at least, I find it provides a lot of value because it gives you additional information, right? Sometimes it can lead to different outcomes, but it gives you additional information, and it gives you additional things to go on, or an additional feeling to go on to make your choice for a candidate, right? It should be no different for a system.
Exactly, and your company is not their company, but at least it gives you a snapshot, and at least you can look at how they're doing things, and if things in your organization are different, you can factor that into the decision. But it's a good yardstick, definitely. Joël, fantastic. Final question. If anyone would like to get in touch with you or maybe hire you to help implement their ProcureTech software implementation, how can people contact you?
Yeah, so I have a website called pureprocurement.ca. Based out of Montreal, as you mentioned in the beginning, so mostly operating out of North America. However, I do keep a blog as well, right? So I tend to reflect on these subjects personally from time to time. So just coming on the blog and interacting with me and with the content is something that you can surely do. And often I turn to readers for inspiration on different subjects, right? So if you're wrestling with something and not sure how to approach it or how to solve the problem you have at hand, just get in touch, right? Shoot me an email or even on LinkedIn, pretty active there as well. And it might just be the subject of my next blog post, right? And that doesn't cost anything, so that's great.
That's a great way to get content ideas. Joël, it's been a pleasure talking to you. Thank you very much for coming on the show. And yeah, keep in touch and all the best. Cheers. And just a quick request before we sign off today. If you know of anyone who you think would be a good guest on the show who's maybe got a story to tell of how they implemented a digital transformation in their organization, I would love to have them on as a guest, because, stories are just such a better way of conveying the message than interviewing founders and CEOs of software companies, because it kind of tells how one organization with one specific solution has experienced the journey and, some of the pros and some of the cons and some of the key learnings that they got from that. So if you do know anyone, then please connect with me on LinkedIn or drop me an email, and I would really love to hear from you. Thanks again for listening. Take care and speak to you again next time. Thanks again for listening to this episode of the ProcureTech podcast. If you like the show, then please subscribe, or even better, why not write us a quick review on Apple Podcasts? It would not only really make my day, but it would also help our mission to enable procurement and finance leaders to become more data-driven through the power of digital transformation.